Hi, I'm Kumar McInnes, animator and brand manager at the Jamaica Animation Nation Network. For this video, we'll be looking at interpolation techniques used in 3D animation. At the end of this video, you should be able to apply keyframes to create curves, locate and edit F-curves on a keyframe, enter and use the graph editor, enter interpolation mode in a 3D program, apply constant, linear, and Bezier interpolation to a curve, edit each type of interpolation on a curve, and apply different methods of easing interpolations. The employability skills that are highlighted in this video will teach you how to think critically, use technology, use animation algorithm and interpolation techniques, solve problems, work efficiently, pay attention to details, and plan and organize your activities. Now, let's have a look at what we will be covering in this section. We will learn how to apply keyframes, how to locate and use the graph editor, how to navigate the graph editor interface, and how to identify and manipulate keyframes in the graph editor. Let's get started. For demonstration purposes, I will be using the Blender 3D software. However, all the techniques learned here can be applied to other 3D programs. Now, the first thing that we'll learn how to do is how to apply keyframes. So to apply a keyframe, you'd first need to select an object. So as you can see right here, we have a cube. If I should select the cube and press the I key on the keyboard, I'm presented with a list of different options. Now, let's say I wanted to move my cube across the screen from here over to the right. I would press I and select location because what we're performing is movement. If I wanted to rotate the cube, I would of course click on rotation, and if I wanted to scale, I would click on scale. If I wanted to move the cube and rotate it, I would have to click on the lock rat, which represents location and rotation, and so on and so forth. So to keep this demonstration simple, I'm just going to work with the location keyframe. Let me press I and click on location. And as you can see down here in the timeline, it adds a keyframe. So this yellow line represents a keyframe in Blender. Now with my keyframe added, I can come all the way down to, let's say, frame 20 on the timeline. And if I move my cube over to the right and press I and then select location, so if we should scrub through our timeline, we can see that we have a basic animation. So on frame 0, I added a keyframe which stores the position of the cube right here on frame 0. And on frame 20, I moved the cube, and with the keyframe applied there, the position of the cube is stored inside that keyframe. Now let's look at how to enter the graph editor to manipulate keyframes. If I click on this cube right here and search for graph editor, then left click, I am now inside the graph editor. And I can also switch back to the 3D view by clicking this icon right here and click on the 3D view. Now, to make this demonstration much more clear, I am going to have both views on at once. To do this, I'm just going to click over to the extreme left of this cube right here and drag to create a new window. Then I'm going to change this cube to the graph editor. So now I have my graph editor and I can see my cube right here. Now this curve is what's known as the F curve. This curve right here is what's known as the F curve. And the F curve is an interpolation between 2 points, or in this case 2 keyframes. So here we have one keyframe right here, and we have another keyframe right here. As you can also see, there's another keyframe right here. Now what happened was, because we're not working in 2D space, whenever you apply a keyframe, it actually applies that keyframe to all different axes. So it applied it to the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. Now let's remove the keyframes that we don't need. If we look over here, we can see location. So if I should click the drop down arrow right here to the left, we now see all the keyframes that have been applied. So my animation only takes place on the y-axis, which is represented by this green line right here. So I don't want the Z location nor the X location. So I'm just going to click on the X location and press delete on my keyboard and do the same for the Z location. So now we don't see that keyframe anymore. So we can now focus on the animation that takes place only on the Y axis. Now there's a bunch of things that we can do. We can move the keyframes on the graph editor. So if I should click on the last keyframe, if I should right click on the last keyframe, I can actually move it wherever I want. So let's say I'm just going to move it a bit further down. So let's move it to about frame 50. And we can see that the keyframes are being moved on the timeline as well. And if I should play my animation, we now see the cube takes a much longer time to get to the right of the screen. Let's have a look at what would happen if we manipulate the curve. To manipulate the curve, you would use these points that are to each end of the keyframe. So let's have a look at what would happen if I move the point, let's say right here. Let me play the animation. As you can see, the cube moves backwards, then forward. So inside the graph editor, you can actually alter the animation. If I should move the curve at a very odd angle, like this, and press play, we see that it changes the behavior of the cube. And that's pretty much what you can use the F-curves to do inside of the graph editor. So we just found out about keyframes and F-curves. Now let's move right into interpolation. In this section, you will learn how to enter interpolation mode and switch between the different types of interpolation. So you will learn how to change between the constant, linear, and the Bezier interpolations. You will also learn how to manipulate the F-curves, as well as how to use the keyframe handles. Let's have a look at the different types of interpolation inside of Blender. To bring up the interpolation menu, what we'll need to do is click the T key on the keyboard, and that's T as in toy. So if I should click on the T key, make sure my mouse is within the graph editor area right here and click T. We can see we now have our different interpolation options. So here we see constant, linear, and Bezier, which are the three main interpolations. To apply any of those interpolations, first I would need to select my 2 points. If I should right click on this point and then hold my shift key down and right click on the last point, I now have both keyframes selected. Then if I press T, I can apply a constant interpolation. So let's apply the constant and see what happens. So as you can see, it changes the curve. So if I should play, we notice that what it did was take out all the in-between animation from the cube. So constant interpolation basically removes all the in-betweens. Now let's have a look at the next interpolation. So if I should, with my points still selected, and I press T, then I click on linear, we can see that linear creates a line. So if I should go back to frame 0 and play, we see the cube moves straight across the screen. Now, the main interpolation that animators typically use is the Bezier. So if I should click T again and click on the Bezier interpolation is what gives you the curve. So if I should click this, we can see that we now have our curve, which gives you smoother animation. Now we can manipulate the curve again in various ways. One way that I showed you was how to use the handles at the end of the keyframes. So you click on the handles and move it wherever you want. And then of course you would play the animation to see the result of what you did. Now there are other options. Let me just select these two keyframes again. Select one, then hold on Shift and select the last one. And if I should press T, we see that we have other interpolations, but these are rarely used. These are like presets to the interpolation. So these come with some predetermined points and curves, etc. So if I should, for example, click on maybe exponential, we would see that it has a pre-made curve. And let's see how that alters the animation. So yeah, instead of you selecting the handles and moving the curve all the way down, you could select that option or select whatever option that you require. Now the dynamic effects are basically also presets to the interpolation. So here we have a bounce. So let's look at that. And we can see that it actually changes the shape of the curve. So if I should go back and press play, we see that the cube itself actually looks as if it bounces. So that's pretty cool. Let's have a look at the one that says back. See, it changes the shape again of the F curve. So that's pretty neat as well. And let's have a look at the elastic and see what reaction the cube has to this type of interpolation. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. Maybe you could use that for like maybe, I don't know, a slingshot or something. So yeah, that's pretty much it for interpolation. Let's review. What is a keyframe? What is an F-curve? How do you apply keyframes to an object? What is the purpose of the graph editor? How do you identify a keyframe in the graph editor? Thanks for watching this video on interpolation techniques. I hope that you learned how to apply keyframes and F-curves using the various interpolation techniques.